please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL Hockey Pod PuckCast with Statsman and AJ. Friends, I'm Paul Bruno in Toronto, Ontario. You can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Scholes, a great follow at AJ Scholes24, back in his co-host chair from his new home in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I love the sound of that town. AJ, we finally have some games to review and want to give our views about every team after the first week of games. The schedule of rivalries so far has unfolded. It's the best I've ever experienced. I'm loving it. Rivalry night every time my favorite teams suit up. And I know you feel the same. I'm really enjoying the heck out of this early schedule. It helps that my team's 3-1 too.
Yeah, I mean it's a little brutal, honestly, for the heart rate. When you lose to teams, like for Penguins fans, if we lose to a team like the Ducks or the Sharks, it's disappointing, but you're not furious about it. When you lose to, the Flyers and then have to squeak one past the Capitals a couple days later, it makes the blood boil a little bit, that's for sure.
Well, that's going to get rivalries really intensified early on. I feel the same way, exactly, but happy with the start so far. In any case, our plan for today, folks, is to give our impressions of players who have stood out or struggled for their teams in the opening week of the schedule. But before we go there, AJ, we have two sponsors on today's show for the first time in our history, I think. And I know you want to give our listeners here a reminder from one of them, Owner's Box.
Hey, NHL fans, Owner's Box is here to reinvent the way you play fantasy sports this season. Owner's Box is not DFS. They are the first ever weekly fantasy sports platform that combines the best elements of the industry into one product. Owner's Box is a head-to-head elimination style format that keeps players engaged through live snake drafts, social interaction, and a new layer of strategy that allows you to become the ultimate fantasy GM. The best part about weekly fantasy sports is that there is no long-term commitment. Users are able to draft a new team every single day and participate in different types of contests to keep the fantasy experience fresh and fun, so you're never out of the game. Compete with your opponent over 7 days of fierce competition and get paid out weekly. No more falling subject to unfair payouts, as up to 50% of users win money. Owner's Box also allows users to brand themselves and engage socially across the platform in multiple different ways. Add friends, create custom leagues, and rank up to elevate the trash talk and competition to a new level. Think you've got what it takes to be a weekly fantasy guru? Head over to ownersbox.com to start making a name for yourself today. In honor of the NHL season, if you sign up free now, Owner's Box will match your first deposit up to $500. What are you waiting for? Head over to ownersbox.com/rotowire to claim your bonus and join the new wave of fantasy sports.
You know what? I'm going to get right into that. I've got knee deep into it. I'm going to go shoulder deep into this Owner's Box, AJ. I really like what I see out of this, and I can't thank our marketing department for introducing this concept to me, and I hope our listeners jump right in alongside. It's been a long time, AJ, since we've done the following, our 31-team look around the league, and I took a look at the way this thing would shake out. I always seem to get the opportunity to talk about Toronto and Pittsburgh first. So I thought we'd give you the nod to take the first team, and that would be Anaheim, so that in terms of going back and forth, you will get both of those clubs. But don't worry, our listeners, I will have something to say on each of those teams, and maybe a few other thoughts on other teams that AJ covers. And I'm sure AJ is going to chime in on some of the stuff that I mentioned. So let's dive in, AJ. Your thoughts about the Anaheim Ducks and their start so far this season?
Well, you got to look no further than, Max Comtois with 3 goals in 3 games. It's a great start to the season. He's pairing up, sliding in really well, in a third line role. And that comes alongside a guy like Sam Steele, who's also got 2 assists in those first 3 games. But, if there's one other player that you really got to talk about in terms of the Anaheim Ducks, it's John Gibson. 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 overtime, defeat there. That's 3 points out of the first 3 games, which I think is more than a lot of players and fans would have expected out of the Anaheim Ducks to start the year. So a decent start for them. I'm not anticipating it getting too much better. I think it's going to be a long year, but at least off on the right foot, that's for sure.
And their neighbors in the same Western Division, the Arizona Coyotes, they're looking at a leaderboard on their scoring list featuring Jeff Chychrun. And it's a good thing he's off to a good start with 4 points in the 3 games that they've played, because they've got some tough news to deal with early on. Oliver Ekman-Larsson is on the sidelines, not expected to be out long term, but he will cede the power play quarterback role to Chychrun in the interim. He should be back in about a week or 2. So if you're an owner of him, don't dump him just yet. He's too important to your team in all likelihood, but should be back to vie for the power play quarterback situation alongside Chychrun. But Chychrun looks to be positioned for a breakout campaign along that defensive front. He will get top pairing minutes with Alex Goligoski for now, and that's a great place to be in for him. Moving up in rank, probably, in terms of the order of operations here, is Jordan Osterly and Nicholas Hjalmarsson will hold down that second pairing, and Kyle Capobianco moves into the fold as long as Ekman-Larsson is out of the lineup. I love their net minding situation. 2 guys that have been around the league for a while. The goaltending is in good hands here with Kemper and Ranta. Kemper will get the lion's share of the work, and he's got 2 of the 3 starts so far. All hands are on deck and healthy, and your old pal Phil Kessel's off and running, AJ, with 3 goals so far. Clayton Keller, another guy that I really like. He's in the mold of a Zach Hyman or Brendan Gallagher. That's the kind of player that I see this guy as, a feisty guy, but also has a nose for the net. He's got 3 points so far. Connor Garland, Clayton Keller is another guy that's in the mix here with 3 points as well. Ekman-Larsson, I told you how important he was to this club. He got 3 assists in the first 2 games he played. So he's going to be productive, I think, behind an offense that really seems to be coming together. That top 6 starting to look like a good, solid 2 forward lines that they can choose from. And maybe even the third line is credible with the pairing of Derek Brassard and Tyler Pitlick on that third line alongside Clayton Keller. So all told, a good start for the Coyotes, and things are in place except for that defenseman situation with Larson.
That is a huge hit, not having Oliver Ekman-Larsson, a week-to-week designation for him. And, the hits keep on coming for the Boston Bruins as well. Andre Kasha was placed on IR, so that means at least 7 days there for the IR, and that's complicating things on a right wing spot that's already kind of jumbled around. They've got David Pastrnak is still out. They've tried Jack Studenica up there. There's talk about Craig Smith playing on that first line right wing. Right now, they've got Jake DeBrusk there. So really something important to watch out for in terms of, both season long and DFS is who's playing with Bergeron and Marchand. And right now, that's really questionable as far as that goes. Defensively, they've also got a potential injury to Matt Grzelcyk. He left Monday's game with no real update, so we'll have to wait and see on him. But in terms of those top guys, Marchand, 1 goal, 2 assists, Bergeron, 1 goal, 1 assist through 3 games. So decent production for them. I will note that, they've combined for 3 power play points. So the 5-on-5 numbers maybe aren't as good as you would want, but who cares when this team is going to produce at solid levels with the man advantage.
Yeah, but you've implied that there are a little dents in the armor here with the Bruins. It's not the Bruins that we've been used to for the last 6 or 7 years, at least in the early going, AJ. I see some concerns. Pastrnak won't be ready to play, it looks like, until the first week of February, and they'll need him as soon as they can because Studnicka is a placeholder. Craig Smith was brought in as insurance, but neither one of them. You can put both these guys on the ice at the same time. I don't think they'd be as productive as Pastrnak. And then the hit on defense with Matt Grzelcyk is something they could ill afford with the losses of Chara and the guy in St. Louis. What's his name, AJ? Corey Krug. Thank you. That's 2 big hits from their blue line depth that are gone missing, and Grzelcyk is a third one, so really can't afford any more losses on the back end here. They played some low-scoring games, as you suggested, their 5-on-5 game, not where they want it to be, and it won't be until they get that order restored up front. The Buffalo Sabres, they got to be pleased with their last game. They blew out the Flyers, something that maybe they should send the film of that game to your friends in Pittsburgh, AJ, because the Sabres laid waste to the Flyers, driving Carter Hart right out of the game early on with a 4 spot against him in the first period. Jack Eichel leading that parade, and he's parlayed that game into a strong start for him. 6 assists, yet to bulge the twine himself to lead the scoring parade there. Taylor Hall making a case for everybody to keep an eye on him. He's only on a one-year contract, folks, and if he produces at this rate, there's going to be a lot of suitors coming around next year. 6 points for him in the first 3 games played. I think he likes playing alongside Eichel, and we knew that he would. And the guy that is filling out that line at the moment is Sam Reinhart, another offensive catalyst with 3 points. So their big guns are firing, but it's worth noting that Jeff Skinner is on the 4th line still, and that's an expensive 4th liner, folks, the most expensive in the NHL. No points to show for his record so far, averaging only 15 minutes of ice time, and the Sabres have to look at him with a Spockian eye, I'll say. And it's only made worse by the fact that their depth chart is hindered by the losses of Girgensons and Okposo. Girgenson's out for the entire season. Okposo, it's not sure how long he's going to be out. And in the nets, there's an issue with Linus Ullmark. His head just doesn't seem to be right in terms of the starting of the season. Carter Hutton is shouldering the load here and being the good soldier, and that's pushing Linus Ullmark's playing time down, I think, if it continues. They're going to lean on Hutton, and Ullmark might be just sulking in the background. So that's a tough situation for owners of that netminder in Buffalo.
Well, look, we told you during the preview that Jonas Johansson could get some games. I said that off the top. So a situation to watch in terms of what happens with Ullmark and whether Hutton takes the bulk of the load. Look, if Ullmark isn't going to play right now, it's a personal reason for being away from the club. If Hutton's struggling, why not put Johansson in at this point? So, and you mentioned Jeff Skinner. I think the important thing to look at, though, I get the 4th line role is concerning, but he's logging pretty decent minutes on the power play. You look at the second game against Washington, almost 3.5 minutes with the man advantage there. So while his 5-on-5 minutes aren't there, they're still using him on the power play. I will jump over to his former club, the Carolina Hurricanes. They've got some guys really producing here as well. And it starts with Andrei Svechnikov, 5 points in 3 games, tearing it up. And another thing we mentioned early on in the show is we wanted to see what Vinny Trocheck would look like in a full year with the Hurricanes here. And so far, so good. 2 goals, 1 assist along that stretch. You know, it's funny to think, is Sebastian Aho having a bad start to the year with just 3 points in 3 games when you compare it to his cohorts there? But I really don't think so. You know, he'll, I think, eventually maybe surpass some of those guys in terms of production. But right now, that second line is where it's at. Svechnikov, Trocheck. And for me, in terms of DFS, I don't even care who's on the right wing. I'll probably use that guy. It's Martin Necas right now, but somebody else to consider there.
And AJ, we got to note that Jordan Staal is out of the lineup dealing with COVID concerns. We're going to see a lot of this during the course of the season, I think, at least in the early going until the vaccine gets shared around the league. We expect it to be. But that's a tough loss for this team. He figured to be in the 3rd line slot in a checking role, and that assignment goes against the other team's top players. So very important that they get that in order and his health restored, because he means so much to the team in terms of the overall defensive structure when he's on the ice. And a leadership role that he plays for this team is also significant. So a tough loss for the Canes. Up next, we go to the North Division, the Scotiabank North Division, as they call it, with the sponsorships. AJ, I'll not get used to that. We won't have long to deal with it. It's only a 1-year thing anyway. But in any case, that's one of the 5 major banks that I didn't work with in my previous career. I did work with most of the others. So a little plug there for the banking industry north of the border. In the Calgary Flames situation, look, we know the partnership of Tkachuk and Elias Lindholm is something that fantasy owners wanted to keep an eye on. But who's going to play on the right side? Well, it was Dylan Dubé at the start of the season, but he's listed as day-to-day. So that situation could be in flux and probably will be updated in the next 24 hours by our crack staff, including AJ Scholz at the home office in Wisconsin, AJ. So maybe you have a comment on that, but it's the right wings here that are in flux for this team. The second line features Gaudreau and Monahan, and on the right side there they have Josh Leivo, a guy that had a cup of coffee in Toronto, but really had a bit of a breakout in Vancouver and parlayed it into a contract extension with Calgary this offseason. So it's the right side for me that's the positions to watch here. In terms of the early going, this is one team that's flourishing with a 2-0-1 start to keep up with a couple of Eastern rivals in Canada. They're carrying the flag for Western Canada so far. And Tkachuk is the guy that everybody's keeping an eye on. 3 points in 3 games so far. Lindholm with 4 points. Gaudreau with 4 points. So the big shooters are delivering the goods. They're hoping for some of the secondary scoring to come through. And that means the likes of Mikael Backlund. He has a couple of points in 2 games. Dubé, for his part, 2 points in 2 games. And the veteran on defense, Mark Giordano, not missing his old partner, TJ Brody, quite so much. He's got 2 points in 3 games, although he has a -1, still logging over 21 minutes of play. So if you thought that the gray beard on the Calgary Blue Line was going to slow down, the early indications are that he's not, AJ.
I think it's surprising how quickly Dominic Simone was dropped from the top line. You know, he was slated in that spot for during training camp, and I expected him to kind of hang out there for at least a little bit, but they quickly pivoted from there. I'll jump over back south of the border now and talk about the Chicago Blackhawks. They're getting hopefully some good news right around the corner. Carl Soderberg is quarantined as of January 12th was when he had entered his mandatory 7-day quarantine. So you do the math on that. Today's the 19th. So he should be back with the team today or tomorrow and possibly playing games as early as the 22nd. And that's a big boon for this club when you consider they're already without Jonathan Toews and Kirby Dach, both on long-term IR. That has meant that Pius Sutter, the youngster, has gotten an opportunity to play the first-line role, picked up an assist in his most recent game on Sunday against the Panthers, and that could be a sign of things to come with him. Outside of him, the production has come, primarily from Alex DeBrincat, 2 goals and 1 assist, and Patrick Kane, 1 goal and 1 assist. I think what's most interesting to continue watching is the goaltender situation here in Chicago. Colin Delia currently has played 2 games, Malcolm Subban 1, but nobody has won a game there. They're both actually sporting .848 save percentages and goals against averages north of 5. So really, not a lot to like in terms of the net minding here. I would guess these guys continue to split unless somebody can show something. And don't be surprised, maybe if Kevin Laine gets an opportunity here.
Without trying to anger Hawks fans, I got to say this. The Chicago fans must be in the same quandary as about 20 major league teams after the first week of the season. Folks, your team is not going to make the playoffs. That's the blunt edge of the sword here. And sad to say, it's a development year for Chicago. I feel the sorriest for the likes of Patrick Kane, but he's going to be awash in millions of dollars with his salary for years to come. So don't feel too bad. There aren't going to be any telethons for him in the foreseeable future. And the same could apply to Duncan Keith. These are veterans whose job now is to teach the youngsters and carry the flag for the next wave of Chicago clubs. And that won't be long before that team gets things righted, AJ, I think. So with no further ado, we'll switch over to the Columbus Blue Jackets. And it falls to me to talk about this club. Mikko Koivu is out of the lineup. They brought him in to solidify the center ranks, but it's in good hands with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Max Domi, although Dubois is really making noises off the ice for his desire to want to leave the club, AJ. He wants out, and people are wondering why, but I have a hunch that it has to do with the non-relationship that he has with Coach Tortorella. They had a very public display of acrimony between them during a game that I saw last year, and I'm sure it was well publicized enough that you caught wind of it too. They don't get along, and they're trying to smooth things over, but Pierre-Luc Dubois has expressed his desire to want to be traded, and in the meantime, he's trying to hold up his end of the bargain. He's got 1 goal to show, but a -2 so far. This guy's a young guy who will look good in anybody's top 6. It just doesn't appear that it'll be Columbus's thing much longer. But I think the sooner they get rid of him, the sooner they can turn things around and really focus on their season at hand. They don't want it to go down the dumper just because they have this business going on. And I think it's dominating the landscape of the club. AJ, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's also interesting that Max Domi doesn't have any points as well, and he was benched for the end of that first game. I honestly, I think the NHL's version of Hard Knocks should just be, following John Tortorella and whoever he's, interacting with. And, he said that they asked if they talked about it anymore, and he replied just like, no. And that was it. There was no room for more questions from the reporters. So it'll be interesting to see. I honestly thought the Pierre-Luc Dubois, trade rumors would go away as soon as he signed that contract. I thought maybe it was a bargaining chip, right? Like, okay, well, if you're not going to give me my RFA deal that I want, then I want out. But they have persisted and they had lingered on, and I think that's a concern for Columbus fans. I'll take us to the Mile High City next, and we'll talk about the Colorado Avalanche here. Only 2 games for them, so playing a lighter schedule at the start of the season, but that hasn't stopped their stars in Nathan MacKinnon picking up a goal and 2 assists. 2 of those points coming, including the goal, coming on the man advantage. Interestingly, Andrei Burakovsky started out on the top line to spread things out. They decided to ditch that after the first game, but he still has managed 2 goals and 1 assist for his part. So solid numbers there. I think if there's a maybe quote unquote surprise player, although he wouldn't be that surprising if you've listened to our show for any length of time, is Samuel Girard with 3 assists through the first 2 games. He's right there with Cale Makar, who also has 3 assists. So keep an eye on Girard. If he's available in one of your leagues, he's definitely worth picking up. And I think a good option in DFS as well. Eventually here, I think we'll see Pavel Francouz, but right now it's been all Philip Grubauer through the first 2 games.
And AJ, I want to talk about the Dallas Stars, but they haven't played any games yet this season. So we're going to just have to forecast their lineup for our listeners, reminding you that they have a lot of talent up front, and the top 6 has really taken shape over the last couple of years with a real tool on the fly. Jamie Benn and Alex Radulov and Tyler Seguin are names that you'd recognize. Tyler Seguin is on the IR right now, but I like what they've done to add Denis Gurianov and Rupe Hintz to the mix in the last couple of years, and look for them to be a continuing part of the development of the Dallas offense. It's the whole club has been built around a defensive structure that is more publicized, and the beneficiaries there were Anton Khudobin and Ben Bishop in the past. We also highlighted in our season preview that Bishop is dealing with injury situation. So Jake Ottinger is on the roster supporting Khudobin. Khudobin has made a case for himself to be rated as one of the top backups in the NHL, but thrust into the starting role now. We'll see how he fares once the serious shooting starts for this club this week.
Well, he got him into the Stanley Cup final last year with Bishop out. So I think they're probably feeling pretty confident that they have a 1B instead of a backup. Over in the Motor City, the Detroit Red Wings, look, I hate to be that guy and, talk about tooting my own horn, but if you go back to the tape, which you can now by watching us over on YouTube, I told you that Bobby Ryan might be one of the best signings of the season. 3 goals through 2 games with the Red Wings there. He is really, I think, going to have a phenomenal year. All of those goals have come at even strength as well. So not reliant on power play numbers. Dylan Larkin also has 2 goals in his first 3 games. Bobby Ryan missed the opener. Obviously, the question mark is in goals. Right now, I was surprised to see Thomas Greiss took the first game for them and has played 2 so far, but he's got losses in both, despite decent numbers, a .93 save percentage in those 2 outings. Jonathan Bernier got the win in his lone appearance. So I think they'll continue to split, but I admit I was a little surprised to see Tommy Greiss take the first game.
Yeah, I am too, and I'm really keeping an eye on this situation because in the past, when Bernier has been partnered with somebody who's really threatened his position, both in Toronto and last season in Detroit, he didn't fare too well when the competition was close. But when Jimmy Howard fell by the wayside last year, he took off and he flourished as much as you can in Detroit and had a very nice year in that rubber factory. And things promised to be better for him. I like the retooling on the fly. Philip Zadina is a guy that talked a little bit more than his skills showed on the ice in training camp last year, his rookie camp. But I think he's got his head on straight. and it's parlayed itself into 2 assists in the first 3 games. So a positive start for him too. And keep an eye on Filip Hronek, folks. This guy is a guy I'm very high on in terms of the defensive structure of this team. He figures to be the linchpin, the power play quarterback, and they have a few dynamic forwards that he can play with. So that power play could be something that surprises some teams on occasion. In terms of surprising starts, I think the panic button has been pressed in Edmonton, though, AJ. Their last 2 games against Montreal, I watched them both, and they looked dreadful. And I'm saying that on the eve of 2 games with them coming to Toronto. Watch them turn it around and blow out my Maple Leafs and make me eat those words. But you have to report what's happening so far, and you had to get a microscope to find where Conor McDavid was last night. That's how tough things are in the most recent starts. But you look at the overall, they're 1-3, and certainly the likes of Draisaitl and McDavid, they have done their share of scoring in the earlier part of the schedule, but they were MIA. So their 5 points apiece came in the first 2 games. They were pretty much blank in the last 2, and that's not a good sign. A good sign for them, though, is Kyler Yamamoto emerging as a viable DFS play. He's going to play top 6 minutes here with the big boys, and probably his price point is still going to be considerably lower, so watch out for him. Tyson Berry doing what Tyson Berry did in Toronto last year, AJ. 2 points in 4 games. You know, they expect a better rate of production than that on the season, particularly with the stars that he gets to play with here. The special teams has been a mess, despite the fact this team should have been one of the top power plays right out of the chute. They were last year, and for his part on even strength, he's a -3. So I could have warned them that this is the guy that I thought that they were getting, and so far I'm right on the money.
The concerning thing about Conor McDavid right now is that power play. You look at his first 4 games, at least 5 minutes of power play ice time in each game, including their game last night, 8 minutes and 35 seconds with the man advantage. Nothing to show for it, but perhaps most concerning, 1 shot on goal. 1 shot on goal. Conor McDavid in a full game playing 21 minutes total, almost 22. 8.5 of power play time. That's a concern as far as I'm considering it. Look, we'll go from way north of the border all the way down south and talk about the Florida Panthers next. One game for us to talk about here, so not a real deep system. I think it's kind of interesting. Chris Driedger got the start over Samuel Montembaum with Sergei Bobrovsky unavailable, but at this point, I expect Bob will be in net for their next contest. Offensively, you got to look at Jonathan Huberdeau, a goal and 2 assists in that game. And then one that I'm probably going to botch here, but I'm going to do my best. Eetu Luostarinen, the youngster, 1 goal, 1 assist in that game as well. And then Patrick Hornqvist, their acquisition from the Penguins in that big trade, a goal and an assist in that game as well. Look, it's a good start to the year. There's still a lot to go in terms of how they're going to look, but I think it's a positive indicator. But everything with this team, as always, will depend on what the $10 million man Sergei Bobrovsky does once he's back in the lineup.
And I'll go on record as saying I don't have any faith in him, and they would be well advised to go look for the other 2 goalies to vie for more playing time if he struggles at all. They can't wait on that. So pressure on him right out of the chute is the focal point for me. The LA Kings, they're rebuilding, retooling in a big way, and still they rely on their veteran. Jeff Carter is one of them, and Anze Kopitar is another one. They're 2 of the top 3 scorers out of the chute. 4 points for Carter, 2 for Kopitar. But I'm keeping an eye on Andreas Athanasiou. This guy was looking for a place to play well into the offseason, and on the eve of the NHL season, he finally agreed to a deal in LA. And I think it's a great place for him to get some ice time and really showcase the offensive side of his game. And to that end, he's got two goals to show in the 2 games that he's played as well. But they need some production from Alex Iafallo. He had a breakout campaign last year. He got 1 assist in 2 games played, playing a lot though, 21 minutes, 22 minutes almost, averaging on a per game basis. They have had 2 overtime games to start the season, so perhaps that pads the numbers a little bit. The workhorse in goal, again, figures to be Jonathan Quick. He's going to be the guy who is going to be filing for non-support before the season is out, I think, AJ, facing 78 9 shots in 2 games played. That's almost 40 shots per game, and that's too much for any goalie to face. They got to get things in order on the defensive side of the puck, and I wonder how Drew Doughty thinks about recommitting to this team long term. It could be toiling in anonymity for one of the NHL's best defensemen.
Absolutely. It's going to be, I agree, it's going to be a tough time for him. One group of guys not having a tough time early on is the Minnesota Wild. They're getting production out of their youngster, Kirill Kaprizov. I think what's interesting here is when you came into the season, look, the big names that we talked about, potential Calder guys were no doubt Alexis Lafreniere, Tim Stützle maybe, but it's Kaprizov who currently leads the rookies with 4 points through 3 games. A couple other names on there that I'll talk about a little later on, but he's the head of the pack right now, and all of it is coming 5-on-5. So if they add him to the power play at any point, it could be a quick decision maker on the Calder Trophy right now. In addition, the other kind of big news there is that it's been all Cam Talbot at this point through the first 3 games. He's 2-1, .926 save percentage, 2.27 goals against average. This is looking like the Cam Talbot from a couple of years ago that played 40 some games for Edmonton. If he can hold on to that, it might be that the heir apparent Kaapo Kähkönen has to wait a little bit longer to take over for the Minnesota Wild.
And I get to talk about the Montreal Canadiens, huh? Nice. I should have looked at that. I would have traded one team to you. The Habs are off to a great start, though. They swept a couple of games against the Oilers as they continue an early season road trip that's going very, very well for them so far. 2 wins and an overtime loss to the Maple Leafs is the record at the moment for the Habs, and they're led by familiar faces up front in terms of Jeff Petrie and Shea Weber. You'll notice that's 2 defensemen near the top of their scoring with 5 and 3 points respectively. The surprise contributor for me is Jonathan Drouin with 3 assists to show for his first 3 games played, looking a little more engaged than he has in the past. But the brightest light of all, Nick Suzuki for me, and I wonder if our pal. I'm going to take a couple of shots at our pal, Daniel Negreanu here, because he must rue this trade that sent Nick Suzuki packing from Las Vegas in exchange for Max Pacioretty. And Thomas Tatar also went along. So that's 6 points to show for the ex-Vegas Knights here. And meanwhile, if we go down the list here in terms of the production of Montreal's offensive pieces, one Jesperi Kotkaniemi, scoreless in 3 games played. 3rd overall draft pick, AJ. I think they were expecting more from him than he's shown offensively. And our buddy is saying, oh, but he's a 2-way player. Well, one way is missing so far. And I'll leave it at that. A handoff to you. And a nod also before I let you have it, that Jake Allen produced his first dividend with a victory last night in Edmonton, looking very, very good and turning aside 26 of 27 shots.
Well, I'm going to let you plant your flag in the Jesperi Kotkaniemi hill, and I'll just dive on over to the New Jersey Devils. It's been, all the youngsters so far, which is exactly what you want to see if you're a Devils fan. Jack Hughes, 3 assists through 2 games. Miles Wood, 2 goals. Their defenseman, Ty Smith, 1 goal and 1 assist. Clearly, the jump has not bothered him. And Igor Sharangovich, 1 goal as well through those first 2 games. I guess if there's a concerning thing, it's that some of the old guard isn't really doing much. Kyle Palmieri just 1 assist. Pavel Zacha is pointless. Travis Zajac is pointless. So I guess if there's good and bad, but it's going to be a tough slog for them in the East no matter what. So I still don't think the early returns make them a playoff team at this point by any stretch of the imagination. But there's positivity in the air, I think, in New Jersey, or at least there should be.
Slowly they turn as they face a real uphill climb. They're in tough in that division, AJ. One team that figured to be a playoff contender, though, in the Central Division is the Nashville Predators, and they're off to a good start so far. They have a 2-1-0 record in the early going, and they have to be heartened by the fact that top scorers have already hit the ice running. That means Arvidsson, Forsberg, and even Luke Kunin. Between them is combined for 8 points so far. Dante Fabro figured to be a factor among the defensive structure here, which is, I think, still the strength of this team. He's a +2 with 2 assists, so looking good so far there. and the rest of the guys are old hands that they're tried and true on the blue line. So I like that makeup. And we already highlighted this, but I'll remind our listeners that the Seattle draft is coming up a year from now. And you're going to look at this team and say, this is one of a few that's going to protect 4 defensemen overall. And the happiest guy about all that has to be UC Saros in behind them. He figures to have an uptick in playing time, and his numbers should be good on the regular season. And he's off to a decent start so far. In 2 games played, a 1.50 goals against, 95.9 save percentage. Pekka Rinne's taken a backseat to him after a tough early start in terms of turning aside only 23 of 26 shots and taking the loss in their other game.
Well, Islanders fans are obviously maybe a little bit disappointed in the debut for Ilya Sorokin. Gave up a pretty poor outing, all things considered. 5 goals on 32 shots in that one game. And I think what that means is it's going to take a little bit more time for him to fully adjust, which should have been expected. I don't know why there was talk that, he was going to be the next greatest thing and hit the ground running without any hiccups, any problems. Simeon Varlimov, for his part, has 2 wins and hasn't given up a goal yet. So that's a pretty strong start to the year for him. 51 saves and 51 attempts. And so I would guess he's going to still command the bulk of the workload here. But I think Sorokin will see plenty of opportunities. Look, I know you have to play for now and play for this season, but they need to develop this guy. They can't just have Varlamov taking, 40-some games played or something this year. Or even 30 would be a lot in the condensed schedule here. So Sorokin will still get his opportunities, but I think if you drafted him thinking he was going to be the number 1 guy for them, you're probably not feeling great about that choice right now at this point.
And the next club up is New York Rangers. They split 2 games so far, so some good and some bad in the early going. The positive thing is Alexander Georgiev pitched a shutout in his start, and that goaltending thing is going to probably be a deal like win and you're in, because I think there's not much to choose between him and Shesterkin, in my opinion. 2 youngsters who will share the load for the foreseeable future in New York, and it's in capable hands, folks. These guys are both highly regarded netminders, and should give them no concerns in the nets, and that bodes well for the rest of the club. Really, their defensive structure comes from the net out, and they've got an interesting mix on the blue line so far. But I think they have to be really concerned with Anthony DeAngelo. The news is not good on him so far this season in terms of being engaged and whatnot. And off the ice, there's some noise about him too. I'm glad I didn't use him in any of my fantasy drafts. I think there's some concerns around him, and that opens the door for the likes of Jacob Trouba and Adam Fox, 2 offensively gifted defensemen, to kind of take the role of offensive power play quarterback on that team. Up front, it's familiar names like Pavel Buchnevich, Artemi Panarin, and Mika Zibanejad doing what they're doing on a regular basis to lead the offense. But we're expecting big things from Kaapo Kakko. He's already scored his first goal of the season, but I'm concerned about the usage of him. He's only still just barely over 11 minutes in each of the 2 games he played here. I think that's going to go up a little bit. And Alexis Lafreniere is getting a little bit more ice time than him, and has yet to hit the scoreboard in terms of the offense that's expected for him. So really 2 youngsters that we'll keep an eye on, but I guess we'll give him a mulligan for the first week of the season, AJ.
Well, I did use Tony DeAngelo or Anthony DeAngelo, whatever he prefers there. I did pick him in my league, but I insulated that pick by also taking Adam Fox, and I'm feeling pretty good about that choice at this point. I would expect him to see more opportunities with the first power play unit, and so he's definitely a player you're going to want to utilize. Speaking of players to consider utilizing with the Ottawa Senators, obviously Brady Tkachuk probably got taken in most formats, or at least should have. 1 goal and 2 assists through the first 2 games for them. Nikita Zaitsev, 3 helpers through their 2 games, starting to produce decently for them. I think the big concern here, again, similar to what I was talking about in New Jersey, you look at their top scorers: Tkachuk, Zaitsev, Shabbat, Nick Paul, Drake Batherson, even Josh Norris with 2 helpers. There's a very distinctive name missing on this list, and that's Evgeny Dadnov. No points through the first 2 games, brought in to be a top 6 producer for them, and it really hasn't worked out at this point so far. Now, I'm not saying cut bait and drop him if you've got him in your season-long leagues. It could just be an early hiccup, but it's something to monitor and something to watch. And I don't know that you want to hang on to him for too much longer if this slumping continues.
And AJ, I mentioned off the top that the Philadelphia Flyers kind of feasted on the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first 2 games they played this season. They dropped the third one against Buffalo in very poor fashion. So really a roller coaster of emotions for Flyers fans in the early going. And add to that the fact that their number 1 center, Sean Couturier, is out with a rib injury, could keep him out of the lineup for at least a couple of weeks. That's a bit of a concern, but it opens the door for a recent high draft pick, Morgan Frost, to get a chance in a top 6 role. And I'm excited to see what he can do, because he scored like a demon in junior hockey and certainly has ties to Toronto, because he was the son of the Leafs in-arena PA announcer before he was replaced, AJ. And as soon as Frost made the grade, they punted the in-arena host, and he's a friend of mine too, so that hit close to home. But other than that, it's interesting for me to see Jacob Voracek in a third-line role here. Again, they're using him to kind of stretch the roster and get some offense going on that third unit. We're also going to keep an eye on Nolan Patrick, and he's gotten out of the chute in fine style with a goal and 1 assist. I'm happy to see that. A lot of us were waiting to see if he could return to some form of his predicted level of play before he encountered some physical issues that really have plagued him for the last 2 seasons. And it looks like in the early going, at least there are some positive indicators. So that's really a good sign for them. Shane Gostisbehere is out as well on the defense, so that shuffles things up on the back end, but they've still got a wealth of options, offensive options that could run things. Ivan Provorov is probably the best DFS option they have going. Even if Gostisbehere is back in the lineup, he's going to get a little more work on the power play.
I actually like Erik Gustafsson as a potential DFS option as well. Didn't score in the last 2 games, but in that opener against Pittsburgh had a pair of assists on the power play, really a cannon that they're lining up top. So he's an option for you as well. And then, there's something to be said about the fact that Carter Hart had to get the hook, and then Brian Elliott will be starting later tonight. So a bit of an early hiccup there, but that's to be expected with the limited amount of game opportunities that these guys got. No preseason there, short training camp. You'd expect goalies aren't always going to be completely on top of their game, but something to monitor. If Brian Elliott puts together a couple strong outings, maybe he can push this closer to a 55-45 split. Well, it's the time for most of our listeners to tune out for the next hour, because I'll start talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins. At the start of the season, we talked about the third line being the key here. Well, if you look at it, those are the guys leading the way in scoring right now. Brandon Tanev, 2 goals, 1 assist. Mark Jankowski, 1 goal, 2 assists. Jared McCann, a pair of helpers. I think the anticipation was if the third line could produce like that, and then the stars were producing better, that this team would rack up some wins. Right now, the biggest blip is that Evgeny Malkin doesn't have any points right now. But if you watch that last game against Washington, a bit of an eye test situation here. He was looking better towards the better second half there. And I think good things are right around the corner for him. But obviously you have to be concerned that Letang, Malkin, no points right now. Mike Matheson dealing with an injury. He's expected to be out what they called longer term. So Juuso Riikola going to move in to the third pairing. Chad Ruhwedel continues to start over Paul's buddy Cody Ceci, the former Maple Leaf.
First reference to Maple Leafs so far in this episode, and it's Ceci. That's funny. All right. Well, we go over to the San Jose Sharks, and the biggest news there for me is John Leonard, a 6th-round pick in 2018, is getting top 6 minutes, and he has scored a couple of assists in the 3 games, post a -3. So he's got to figure out the defensive side of the game a little bit better, I guess. But if you look at the rest of the scorers, it's familiar faces: Hurdle, Kane, Couture, and Meyer leading the parade. And Brent Burns is showing that he hasn't forgotten about the offensive side of his game with 3 points so far. His running mate in terms of top defensive scoring in the league, Erik Karlsson, off to a bit of a slower start with a 1 point show in with 3 games played. All things that I was hearing was this guy was ready to start the season and in a big way, and a -6 is a big start, but it's in the wrong direction, AJ. So that's tough news for him. In terms of the net minding, it figures that Martin Jones and Devin Dubnyk will split assignments this year, but they're both carrying goals against averages north of 4 in the early going. I mean, it's small sample sizes, but the first guy to rectify that is going to get the lion's share of the net, and it could be another situation of win and you're in San Jose.
I think the Sharks have, or rather the Blues have a similar situation to the Sharks right now. In terms of struggles with some net minding. Now, Jordan Binnington had a great season opener, but then gave up 4 goals in the second game to Colorado, was given the hook after the second period there, was back between the nets, last night against San Jose. But look, you can't be giving up 4 goals to the Sharks. I mean, if you're going to get anywhere in this West Division, it's going to have to be beating some of these teams that have been a little bit easier in the past couple of seasons. So the fact that he's given up 9 goals through the first 3 games of the year is a bit of a concern. Unfortunately for them, they don't have much in terms of better options with Ville Husso being the backup. Maybe they should have tried harder to keep Jay Gallen around. Something to consider there. In terms of offensive output, you're looking at a guy like Jordan Kyrou, 2 goals and 1 assist through the first 3 games. Oscar Sundqvist has a pair of goals. And then Justin Falk with 2 goals from the blue line. What I'm getting at here is that there aren't goals from any of their big guns here in terms of, Ryan O'Reilly, David Perron, Zach Sanford. Now, they did get 1 from Mike Hoffman. He's only played in 1 game, so that's obviously an encouraging sign here. But they're going to need to get more production, specifically out of Ryan O'Reilly. 1 assist through 3 games is simply not good enough. And Torrey Krug, same boat there. 1 assist, 3 games. If he's going to replace Pietrangelo, they're going to need a lot more than that.
Look, we're talking about the Tampa Bay Lightning next, and this is a team that I thought would maybe suffer a little bit of the Stanley Cup hangover and had some roster concerns because they were way over the cap, and the injury to Nikita Kucherov kind of shuffled things around. But once they dropped the puck on the season, this team is 2-0 with a couple of very impressive wins to start the season, albeit they were against the Chicago Blackhawks. So please consider that in the evaluation. Andrei Vasilevsky receded for 2 wins, stopping 60 of 63 shots. He's looking sharp. And offensively, the big names are leading the parade. Steven Stamkos, a guy who had a lot of injury concerns last season, had 5 points in those 2 games, so leading the scoring race here. Andre Palat and Alex Killorn are interchangeable parts for me in terms of second-line depth and maybe first-line opportunity. Right now, Palat listed as the first-line left wing and Killorn on the second unit. They both producing offense. Anthony Cirelli looks to be entrenched in a second-line center role, and that affords them the opportunity to play Braden Point with Steven Stamkos, a luxury for them. And another guy who was much maligned and maybe on the trading block because of his large contract to solve some of these salary cap issues, Tyler Johnson has been available for 1 of the 2 games and looked good. It picked up an assist in 15 minutes of ice time. I'm concerned about his ongoing usage here. They want some roster flexibility, and they'll have to move him eventually. But the injury to Kucherov might have pushed all that decision-making down the road quite a bit. And so we're left to consider who rounds out the scoring leadership of this club. Maybe Yanni Gourde gets a look if Cirelli's offense doesn't make the grade. He would be either one of these guys well-suited for a second or third line. But the big news for me is Stamkos hits the ice running for the defending champs.
If you want to talk about guys hitting the ice running, it's definitely your Toronto Maple Leafs, Paul. Their stars are doing exactly what you want them to do. 3 goals, 3 assists for John Tavares. 3 goals, 3 assists for Mitch Marner. 5 points for Willie Nylander. 4 points for Austin Matthews. 4 points for Justin Holl. Oh, wait. One of these names is not like the other here. Justin Holl putting together a pretty good start to the year when, personally, I would have expected to see more of that defensive production coming from the likes of Morgan Riley or TJ Brody here, but Holl holding his own. You look at the start of the season for Freddie Anderson, not a good first 2 games. Let's be blunt about that. You're playing against Montreal and Ottawa. Those are games that they're going to need to win down the road if they're going to finish on top of this Canadian division. But he bounced back with a good performance against a much more talented Winnipeg team and gave up just 1 goal on 27 shots. So I think things are trending in the right direction. I said a couple bad games to start. For most netminders, it was what you should expect. And I would imagine that Freddie Andersen is back on track, Paul.
You know what? The overall defensive structure of this club is what's impressed me the last 2 games. They really gave up very few top scoring chances in those outings. And against the Winnipeg Jets, a team that features a pretty good power play, they were pretty much ineffective in 5 tries against the least penalty killing. And so that was the most heartening thing for me. I know this team can score, but how well they do is going to be predicated on how well they do against opposition offenses and keeping the puck out of their own net. And it was good to see that Freddie Andersen answered the bell after 2 poor starts. He really shone last night in the victory against Winnipeg. And don't forget about their backup goalie. He looked really solid. Jack Campbell did in the victory that he had against Ottawa in a game where they rested Andersen, and they haven't had a backup goalie win too many games here in Toronto for a while. So Campbell, a really good soldier, a popular guy in the dressing room, and he needs to be mentioned in the early success of the club as well, despite only appearing in 1 of the games. It was an important one, and everything else seems to be in place. The Stanley Cup Parade has already been planned. It's going to be straight up Bay Street, and I've got my lawn chair ready. So let's get on with that. AJ, the Vancouver Canucks, not so much ready for any kind of a parade. They're really struggling with a 1-3 start. And the fact of the matter is their former goalie handed them a couple of those. Markstrom looking very good for Calgary in the early going against his former club. Vancouver really struggling. Overall, the net minding situation, a bit of a gray area. Braden Holtby, his goals against is 3 in 2 games, 66 saves and 66 shots. That's too high. And then even worse, Thatcher Demko got shelled 86 shots in his 2 starts. So they really got to cut that down in Vancouver. And that really screams to what the concern is. We know the likes of Pettersson and Besser and Bo Horvat are going to score, but can they keep the puck out of their net? That's the short story here. Nate Schmidt has had a marker offensively, and alongside Edler, that's 2 pretty good offensive-minded defensemen. But I said offensive-minded. You can add Quinn Hughes to the mix. Some of these guys are going to have to show some defensive acumen. Otherwise, it's going to be a long year in Vancouver.
Well, I totally agree with, expecting Elias Pettersson to score back-to-back 66-point campaigns, but he's got just 1 assist through the first 4 contests. He's one of the few guys I would have pegged to still hit the 20-goal mark, even with the abridged season. But at this point, that may be a little bit too far away already with 4 games in hand on the year. So you're talking about a team that's getting struggles throughout the lineup. The one thing I'll add is, depending on how risk averse you are, or rather willing to take on risk, maybe you use a guy like Braden Holtby or Thatcher Demko in DFS when you can bank on them seeing 35 to 40 shots. I mean, it's not all about just getting a win. Obviously, that would help, and it always does. But, if they're facing high shot totals, it might be worth it to take them if they're, only going to give up 2 to 3 goals, even in a losing effort with that amount of rubber. One team that's not having any problems with the net minding is the Vegas Golden Knights. Robin Lehner, Marc-Andre Fleury, both putting together strong performances. They've got 3 wins in their 3 games. Lehner, .926 save percentage is actually behind Marc-Andre Fleury's .955. So I expect these guys will continue to thrive together. And look, I thought at the start of the year we would see Lehner take the bulk of the workload under Pete DeBoer. He just doesn't seem to be a Marc-Andre Fleury fan. But at this rate, how can you not, get the flower into a few more games here? Offensively, the guys you expect are back on top after a disappointing postseason. Mark Stone, 5 points through 3 games. Patches, 3 goals in 3 games. And Jonathan Marchessault with a trio of points in 3 games as well. So you're getting production out of those guys. Maybe if there's a concerning point, it is the blue line. Pietrangelo, just 1 helper, and Shea Theodore, 2 assists in those 3 games. They're actually, getting okay production out of Alec Martinez. I think 2 assists in 3 games is good for him. Look, it's all about perception, right? 2 assists, 3 games. I'm talking about it being good for Alec Martinez, but bad for Shea Theodore. and real bad for Alex Pietrangelo. So just keep an eye on that and see if those guys can kind of turn it around. But obviously, with what they're paying Pietrangelo, you expect a little bit more.
And the Washington Capitals, talk about a team where the veteran leadership has already shown its face. The top 6 scorers on this club's scoring leadership are guys that you would have expected to be there. Ovechkin, Backstrom, Oshie, Wilson, Kuznetsov, and John Carlson on defense with 2 points himself. Even Jakub Vrana, 2 goals. So the offensive pieces are doing their part. So I start my thinking here. My concern in Washington is Ilya Samsonov figured to get the reins for the starting goalie situation. He's got 336 goals against average, an .868 save percentage, albeit in only 2 starts. But he looks over his shoulder and sees Vitek Vanecek, with 1 goal against and stopping 31 of 32 shots in his game. So it's not unlike the Leafs look with Jack Campbell starring in Game 3. So it's incumbent on Samsonov to really tighten things down defensively here in the nets. He would be helped if Michael Kempny was back in the fold, but he's on the injured list, and that means a little more ice time on the second pairing for Brendan Dillon and Justin Schultz. Carlson and Orlov locked in as the top pairing there. That might be one of the top pairings in the Eastern Conference, AJ. So really, all things considered, the Caps have to be pleased with their start. They're healthy, and their top guns are already filling the net.
Well, you look at the Winnipeg Jets to round out the 31-team look here, and they have some big injury concerns with Patrik Laine missing last night's game. And he started off a fantastic first game. 2 goals, 1 assist. Including that helper came with the man advantage, a really dominant performance, for lack of a better term, in a winning effort there. They didn't have him against your Maple Leafs, and it certainly showed. The team struggled to produce, had just 1 goal in that game, and that left Connor Hellebuyck kind of flapping in the wind a little bit there. He only gave up 2 goals on 37 shots. They got a late empty netter to make it a 3-1 tally, but that's a .946 save percentage. I mean, what else do you expect out of your netminder than that high of production? This team is gonna need to get some offense out of guys here, and they're just not. If Laine is out of the lineup, Scheifele has just 1 goal. Nikolai Ehlers and Blake Wheeler each just have 1 assist, and so Laine being gone shuffles the deck too in terms of that right wing spot. They've got now Matthew Perreault in the second line right wing spot. This is a guy they waived at this coming out of camp so they could put him on the taxi squad. They were willing to lose him, and now he's playing top 6 minutes for them because of the Patrik Laine injury. That's a big concern for this club.
So that wraps up our fly around the 31 teams. We did it in less than an hour, AJ. So a pat on the back for you for the great work tightening up your Pittsburgh commentary. That was a big factor. We also have another interesting sponsor to debut on today's pod, AJ, and I love the name of this company, Monkey Knife Fight. Now that your season-long fantasy hockey leagues have started, this is a great time to check out our friends at Monkey Knife Fight, the fastest-growing site on daily fantasy. The NHL and NBA are in full swing, and NFL playoffs are here. The time is now to take advantage of a 100% instant match up to $50 on your first deposit by using the promo code WIRE. Visit monkeyknifefight.com and use promo code WIRE today. That wraps up our look around the league, AJ, and PuckCast with Statsman and AJ is done for another week. RotoWire Signature NHL Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Join us next week as we continue to do a quick look around the league for each of you to know who's playing where and with whom and who's hurt. Important for fantasy players of all stripes and all formats. You're reminded to follow me, Paul Bruno, at Statsman22. You can follow AJ at AJShows24. As always, we invite you to listen into PuckCast to get our tips to stay out of the competition in your fantasy hockey planning and research. We invite you to stay tuned for our fantasy segment, our DFS segment, where we help you win money on FanDuel and DraftKings. Hang in there, folks. We're going to give you our best bets in just a few moments.